This screencast is to support the teaching of this lesson. It is from Straightforward Pre-Intermediate. That is by Philip Kerr, P. Kerr, K-E-R-R, and the publisher is Macmillan. And this is lesson 9A, and you're going to need a few things. This is the student's book page. You've got the teacher's book pages here. There's some really useful stuff in here. Remember that the recording tape script is here for the listening. Okay, so you can find that here. It's not in a separate place. Also, there's some really useful description of the target language of ED and ING adjectives. Very useful, so please do make use of the teacher's book. You'll also need the audio, which will be emailed to you separately. The main aim of this material is to introduce and to practice ED and ING adjectives, quite a tricky area for all learners really. And there's a sub-aim of listening skills and also of introducing some adjectives. Okay. And we're going to start off with a lead-in. The teacher's book has quite an interesting idea, so let's have a look at that. So you could use this for the lead-in, just some discussion questions basically. Different ways to do this. You could put them up on a slide or have them on a handout, and then maybe focus on the first one together. You could ask one student for a response and then ask another student, or you could say nominate two students and say, right, you talk about number one, everybody else listen and see if your answer is different. And then you could choose two different students and say, right, you talk about the second one. What's your idea of a really good day out? And everybody else listen and see if you have the same idea or something different. And then when those two students have finished talking, you could say, okay, what did you think? Different student. Were your ideas the same or different? That way you've got a role for the listeners, two people speaking, but everybody's actually engaged because they have a job to do. So that's one potential lead-in there. Another potential idea for a lead-in here is at the end of the material. So apparently this is the order of popularity of these particular activities in Britain. So you could put those on the board and say, you know, are you surprised about this? That number one is going to the pub and number 7 is going to an art museum or a museum or gallery. Or you could use some of these questions down here as a lead-in, but do just think about engaging everybody. All right, so if you've got two people talking, then what could the listeners be doing as well? Make sure everybody has a role to play. And then we want to get the students ready for the listening to come. And here's the preparation stage here. Look at the events below and think of a person you know who would like to go to each event. I think that's quite a nice idea. Or they could even just keep it, you could keep it personal and they could look at each event and say whether they would like to go to it or not. I think we need some pre-teaching here. Circus, you've got, I think exhibition's not here written down, but I think it is useful vocabulary. Concert for here, and theatre for musical. Okay, so you might want to do a section first, maybe a matching task where they match the words to pictures, or a description and trying to elicit the words, to pre-teach those words, and then have a look at this activity here. It's just getting them ready for the listening, which is to come next. So we're following the stages of a receptive skills lesson here. So we've had to raise interest and background knowledge first, and I think we've done that through the lead-in and through focusing on that first activity. Then we need to move into an easy listening task. Always thinking also about what vocabulary we need to pre-teach. I think we've done all we need to do by doing that first task with circus and concert, etc. But do have a look at the tape script and the activities and see whether you think there's any other blocking vocabulary that might cause an issue for your students. So moving into the first activity here. Need to set the scene first, so tell the students that they're going to listen to part of a radio program talking about the activities they've just looked at. And what they need to do is to listen and put the activities into the correct order. All right, so in the classroom this is nice and easy. You give them this activity on a handout and they write the numbers on it. Even better, you give them these items here cut up on bits of paper, and as they listen they put them physically into the correct order. How do we do that online? Right, not so easy to do. I think they need to be able to see these, so put them in the chat or have them visible in some way. Perhaps you could give each of them a letter, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and that way they could just write the letter in order on a piece of paper at home while they're listening, rather than trying to write down the Moscow State Circus and dance crazy and things like that. So make it easy for the students to write down the answers. We're not testing their writing. We're not trying to develop their writing skills. We're trying to develop the skill of listening for specific information, which is what this activity will do. At the end, get them to peer check first. Say to them, right, talk, which one do you think was number one? All right, everybody agree? Good. Right, talk together. What's the order of the other ones? Try and get them talking together so that you can listen in and decide how well they've done and assess their progress. If everybody's all at sea, then you're going to need to stop and start the audio again. Check the instructions and start the audio again. If everybody seems to have got most of it right, then you could then check the answers as a class and move on to the next activity. This one's a bit more challenging. They have to listen to the program, and there are 8 mistakes. So they need to be able to look at this and listen for the 8 mistakes. I'd recommend playing up to the first mistake and then stop and say, did you hear a mistake? Yes. And then they'll know what to do. And then you can just play the rest of the audio through, perhaps in 2 bits, 2 chunks, just to have a pause halfway through to help them with the speed of the delivery. Okay, sometimes more complex tasks, longer listenings, you need to chunk it, i.e. just pause every now and then to give the students time to regroup and think and write. At the end, same procedure. Check as a group first, and then check together first. Peers check together, talk together, everybody, and then you come in and conduct class feedback. You'll have to think about how you're going to do that. How are you going to make it visual for the students? Maybe have this information on a Word document or on a slide in such a way so that you can highlight the things that are wrong. All right, and then we're going to move on from there to some vocabulary. So let's have a look at that. Okay, so we've got an activity here to introduce or revise these particular adjectives. So the first activity looks a bit like a memory test to me, which I'm not totally happy with, but I can't really see another way to do it. So it should work fine how it is. So I'm going to reassure the students that they may not remember these things, and that that's okay, because we didn't ask them to remember it when they were listening. Okay, so I would say, okay, let's see what we can remember. And don't worry if you can't remember, but do you remember that one of these adjectives was used to talk about the Moscow State Circus? Which one was it? And see if you can get an answer. And then let the students work alone and see if they know any of the others. And then come back together for group feedback. And in the group feedback, I would like you to check meaning of these items. You could be using the context that was introduced in the listening in order to clarify the meaning. Okay, some of them I think they will probably know, like exciting and enjoyable, but others more complex, I think. Cool, it has an appropriacy issue. There's a certain element of informality about that. Depressing, that definitely needs some clarifying. It's quite a serious one. It's much more than being sad, isn't it? So we're going to need some CCQs here, possibly a cline for where to put depressing. On a line from good to bad, where does that one go? It goes further than bad. So you might find a cline useful to put some of these on to help with the meaning. Some CCQs, but use the context that's been introduced in the listening to help them. So focus on meaning, focus on pronunciation. Be good to see some drilling there. I wouldn't do looking at the audio skip, that will take a long time, and online that tends not to work very well. And then you can round off with exercise 6, a bit of speaking to finish up with, or a variation on some of these questions, whatever you think would work. Maybe something you didn't use in the lead-in you could use at this point. And here is the language focus for this lesson. Vocabulary, ing and ed adjectives. Very confusing area for a lot of students. Right, the book suggests looking at these two sentences here and seeing which adjective describes how the speaker feels and which adjective describes the thing that makes him or her feel this way. Okay, great. That's a really good guided discovery way of leading the students in, seeing what they think before we come in and clarify. I think it's a little bit limited only having the two sentences. I would add two more relating to the listening that happened before, but why not two more examples? Depressing and depressed or something like that, picking up on what happened in the listening to create two more examples. Just gives the students a little bit more to look at and more to work with. And what we're going for is that the ed adjective describes feelings and ing adjectives describe the thing that makes you feel that way. In the teacher's book there's a really nice idea with arrows and pictures, which I think you should look at. I think it's really useful and creates a nice visual hook for the students as to which is which. Then you could ask them if they know any other adjectives that work like this, because there's a whole raft of them and the teacher's book gives you a nice list: bored, boring, interested, interesting, etc. And then you could set them off into exercise 2. All right. Most of this vocabulary has been covered already by the previous teacher, but there are some new things. Annoying and annoyed, and disappointing and disappointed. I think they'll know surprising, surprised, and tired and tiring, but I would clarify the meaning of annoyed, annoying, disappointed, disappointing before they set off and do this activity. Okay, you're going to need to do some drilling and you're going to need to do some checking of meaning. So some really nice work that you can do around this vocabulary with meaning and pronunciation. I wouldn't bother listening to the recording to check your answers. Just do it the same way that you normally would. Get the students to check together and then have class feedback. And remember, in the feedback from controlled practice activities, it's a really good idea to ask concept checking questions again. Okay, so here at the basic level of the ed, ing adjectives, you might be saying, okay, so is it talking about feelings or the thing that gives you the feeling? Or it might be CCQs related to the particular activities. Okay, so depressed, is that the same as sad, or is it more sad or less sad? Things like that. So think about bringing in concept questions when you do feedback from controlled practice activities. It's a really good opportunity to check where they're at with the language before you move on to a freer task. And this is the freer task that the book has. It looks pretty good. It's personalized, and they have to complete the sentences so they're true for them. So it's a freer activity, so it needs scaffolding. Scaffolding can come in the form of the teacher giving a model of the task. It can come in terms of preparation time. It can come in terms of being given other words or grammar or different examples. And I think here what we need is a teacher model, and we need time for them to complete the task before they speak. So I would fill in these sentences, they're true for you, put them up on the screen and say to the students, okay, ask me some questions about my sentences. What do you want to ask me? And just elicit some questions from them, just general everyday chatty questions. Then give them time to fill in these sentences for themselves, and then get them to read out maybe 2 of their sentences and the others ask them questions. There's quite a lot of stages to this activity. Teacher model first, then time to fill in the sentences alone, then nominate someone to say a few sentences, and then maybe again people asking questions. So a very nice activity to end on, creating a lot of speaking for the students.